A couple of bikers walked into a coastal diner looking for a bit of trouble. They found a highly decorated Navy commander instead. What happened next would expose a $100 million smuggling operation, topple a criminal empire, and teach the Steel Serpents motorcycle gang a brutal lesson. Sometimes the most dangerous person in the room is the quiet woman drinking coffee in the corner. The bikers thought they were intimidating a lone woman, but they picked a fight with one of the most decorated naval officers in American history. I'd love to tell you the story of how two bikers messed with the wrong female Navy commander and how their biggest mistake became their final one. If you're enjoying these stories, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow's special episode is one you definitely don't want to miss. The morning fog rolled thick off the ocean, blanketing the streets of Port Haven in a ghostly shroud. Commander Sarah Mitchell sat alone at her usual window booth in Mary's Harbor Diner, watching the steam rise from her coffee cup in lazy spirals. She'd chosen this small coastal town precisely because it was a quiet place, after 20 years of classified operations and missions that would never make the history books. All she wanted was to have a chat with the lovely Betty Murphy, the silver-haired owner who'd run the diner for over 3 decades. Betty approached with a fresh pot of coffee. "You're too young to," she began. "My dear, you look so tired," she said, topping off Sarah's cup with a warm smile. Sarah was reminded of her mother, who had passed away 15 years ago. Betty had no idea about the nightmares that still woke Sarah in cold sweats, or why she always chose the booth with the clearest view of both exits. The peaceful morning was shattered as 2 motorcycles roared into the parking lot. Their engines were deliberately loud enough to rattle the diner's windows, and the other customers tensed up, conversations dying mid-sentence. Betty's smile faltered as she gripped the coffee pot tighter. Sarah watched the Steel Serpents' distinctive snake emblem on their leather jackets as they dismounted, noting how the other patrons suddenly found their breakfast extremely interesting. Jake Rattler Davidson led the way, his scarred face twisting into what he probably thought was a charming smile as he surveyed the room. His lieutenant, Mike Crusher Peterson, followed close behind, both men moving with the exaggerated confidence of bullies who'd never faced real resistance. Jake's gaze lingered on Sarah for a moment too long before turning to Betty. "Betty, sweetheart," he called out, his voice carrying an edge that made several patrons look away. "We missed you at the town meeting last night." Mayor Hayes was disappointed. Betty's hands trembled slightly as she sat down. "Jake, you know how it is." Sure. Jake moved closer, but he knew when the mayor calls a meeting, it's not really optional. He's trying to help this town grow, and he needs everyone's support. His hand came down hard on the counter, making Betty flinch. Sarah watched the exchange silently, her coffee forgotten. She catalogued details with practiced precision. Mike carried a knife in his boot, poorly concealed. Jake's jacket bulged slightly on the left side. They were used to intimidation, but their sloppy weapon discipline told her they'd never faced serious resistance. "Maybe," Betty said, her voice stronger now. She told the mayor that he should focus on running the town instead of letting criminals dictate policy. The diner went dead silent. Jake's fake smile vanished. "What did you just say to me, old woman?" he growled. Reaching across the counter, Sarah moved before conscious thought took over. She was a trained Navy officer, so she was ready for anything. She grabbed Jake's wrist and applied precise pressure to nerve clusters that made his fingers spasm open. She said. Sarah spoke softly, but her voice carried throughout the silent diner. "The mayor should do his job." The diner was so quiet you could hear a pin drop. Jake tried to pull away, but Sarah's grip was like iron. Mike moved to flank her, but she remained focused on Jake. "Let go of me," Jake snarled. "Or my boy, here will make you regret it." Sarah smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Will he? Because from where I'm standing you've got 3 choices. 1, you and your friend leave now and we forget this happened. 2, you try something stupid and I send both of you to the emergency room. You to the emergency room. Or 3. She increased pressure slightly, making Jake win. "We'll see just how many bones I can break before you hit the floor." "You have no idea who you're messing with," Jake spat. "Actually I do," Sarah replied. "Jake Rattler, dishonorable discharge from the Navy in 18. You and the Steel Serpents have been running protection rackets up and down the coast, but lately you've moved up to something bigger. Did I miss anything?" Jake's face went pale. Mike's hand moved towards his weapon, but Sarah's voice stopped him in his tracks. "I wouldn't. Your draw is slow, and you give away your intentions like an amateur. By the time you clear leather, this will be over for a long moment." Nobody moved. Then Jake raised his free hand in surrender. All right. We're leaving, but this isn't over," Sarah said, releasing him and stepping back to give them space to exit. "It can be that way, up to you." You two bikers backed away. It was a bit of a shame, but their attempts to look menacing didn't quite work out, especially with Jake rubbing his wrist as they mounted their bikes. Jake shot one last glare through the window. "Who are you?" he said in a low voice. "You," Betty whispered back as the motorcycles roared away. Sarah sat back down, taking a sip of her now cold coffee. She'd seen enough bullies for one lifetime, but as she watched the steel serpents disappear into the fog, she knew Jake was right about one thing. This wasn't. Oh my goodness. She just painted a target on her back. If her instincts were correct, the protection racket was just the tip of the iceberg. The steel serpents were part of something much bigger, something that reached far beyond this small coastal town. Betty placed a fresh cup of coffee in front of her, along with a slice of apple pie. "Whatever happens next," the older woman said firmly, "you're not alone." Sarah nodded, already running through scenarios in her mind. She'd chosen this town, looking for peace, but sometimes peace had to be fought for. And if the steel serpents wanted a fight, they were about to learn why Navy commanders were the last people you wanted as enemies. "I'm not alone, and neither are you," Sarah said quietly, pulling out her phone to make a call she'd hoped never to make again. It was late that evening when Sarah sat in her small apartment above Murphy's Diner, cleaning her Glock 19 with practiced precision. She thought back to the encounter with the steel serpents. Pens played over in her mind as she considered her next move. A knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. "It's open," she called out, not looking up from her work. Sheriff Tom Cooper stepped inside. His weathered face betrayed concern. "Word travels fast in a small town," he said. "I heard you had a run-in with Jake and his boys." "I just had a friendly chat with some customers who were being impolite," Sarah replied, reassembling her weapon. "Oh," Cooper said, settling into a chair across from her. "Commander Mitchell, Sarah," she corrected gently. "I know about your background when you moved here 6 months ago. I ran a check, and I found out that you served in the Navy for 20 years and received multiple commendations. Even my law enforcement clearance couldn't access that information." Sarah finally looked up, meeting his gaze. "You know, I can handle myself. That's what worries me. The Steel Serpents aren't just some local gang anymore. They've got connections that go deep. Last month, my deputy found a shipment at the port that would have raised serious red flags before we could investigate. Unfortunately, orders came down from the state level to back off. It sounds like someone's being paid to look the other way." Cooper leaned forward, lowering his voice. "Mayor Hayes holds meetings at the Steel Serpent Clubhouse. Half the city council drives new cars. They shouldn't be able to afford the Port Authority. The sudden funding for extensive renovations is suspicious. I've got a teenage daughter, Sarah. I can't risk it, so you turn a blind eye." Sarah finished for him. "I do what I can without getting my people killed." Cooper stood adjusting his belt. "I'm not here to tell you what to do. Just be careful. Jake isn't the real power in the Steel Serpent. His boss, Marcus Cross, is coming to town next week. The man's got connections to smuggling operations across 3 continents." Sarah's expression remained neutral, but her mind was racing. Cross was a name she'd heard before. It was during her last mission with Naval Intelligence. It had gone. "Thank you so much for the heads up, Sheriff." As Cooper reached the door, he paused for a moment. "Betty Murphy is a wonderful woman. She's been serving coffee and pie in this town since I was a kid. What you did today was really admirable. It's about time someone stood up for her." After Cooper left, Sarah pulled out her phone and dialed a number she hadn't used in months. "Reynolds speaking. Mike, it's Mitchell. Remember that smuggling operation I've been tracking it in Singapore, the one that got Johnson and Martinez killed. I've also found his supply chain, which is in Port Haven." "I know, Port Haven. It's a bit out of the ordinary, isn't it? I'm supposed to be retired, but I'm going to need everything you can get me on Marcus Cross and the Steel Serpents MC. I'd prefer if you could get it to me through official channels, but I don't want to burn any of your backdoor sources. I'll need it in 48 hours, and I'll be careful. Cross isn't someone you want to tangle with alone. I'm so happy you're enjoying this story. It took us a lot of time to put together, so we really appreciate your support. If you like what you're reading, please subscribe to our channel. We'd be so grateful." The next morning, Sarah was helping Betty open the diner when a group of motorcycles roared past. This time, the riders were wearing leather and displaying a different insignia, the Iron Wolves. Their leader, a massive man known as Stone, caught Sarah's eye as they passed. There was a moment of recognition between them. Oh, and there was something else. It was a message and it meant trouble. Betty asked her, Bo tired, maybe not? No, Sarah replied. The Iron Wolves were different. They were mostly former military, and they protected their territory, but they didn't prey on civilians. If Sarah's instincts were right, they might be potential allies. Her phone buzzed with a text from Mike. Data was coming through, and it was definitely your guy. He'd got coordinates from multiple port facilities. Also, local intel suggests the Iron Wolves might be the enemy of your enemy. Sarah smiled. Things were falling into place. Dee witnessed yesterday's confrontation, and they nodded to Sarah with newfound respect. Word had spread that someone had finally stood up to the Steel Serpents. Around noon, Deputy Sarah Martinez entered, making a beeline for Sarah's usual booth. "You need to see this," she said quietly, sliding a manila envelope across the table. Sarah reviewed the photos inside surveillance footage from the port. They showed Steel Serpent members overseeing cargo containers being moved at night. It was professional security, but it didn't match the gang's usual muscle. The documentation was very official stamps from last night. Here's the thing, they're getting a bit sloppy and a little scared. Jake's got his people watching this place, watching you, but they're not being subtle about it. Sarah had noticed that Steel Serpent prospects had been parked across the street all morning, trying too hard to look casual. "Your boss knows you're showing me this," Sarah Martinez smiled grimly. "Tom's a good man, but he's scared me. I'm tired of watching these bastards destroy our town. Betty was there for me when my mum died, making sure I had hot meals and a place to do homework. I've got her back, same as you, Sarah. She's a lovely lady." The young deputy was studying her. She had steel in her spine and fire in her eyes. She was definitely a potential ally. "Be careful," Sarah warned. "If they realize you're helping me, I can handle myself. I'm not the only one who's had enough." As if on cue, the rumble of motorcycles approached again. The Iron Wolves were back, this time pulling into the diner's lot. The diner's lot. Stone dismounted first, his big, strong frame filling the doorway as he entered. He looked around the room, taking in his surroundings, before his eyes settled on Sarah. "Mind if we join you?" he asked, his voice a warm, friendly rumble. Deputy Martinez tensed, but Sarah nodded, and Stone and 3 of his officers slid into the booth. Betty appeared with coffee, seeming totally unfazed by the new arrivals. "She heard you had words with Jake," Stone said after Betty left. "Man's got a reputation for holding grudges," he said. "Is that why you're here?" "We're here to warn you," Stone chuckled. "No, ma'am, we're here because the Steel Serpents are moving contraband through our territory without permission. It's the kind of thing that gets people killed." He glanced at Martinez, who stood her ground. "We thought you might be interested in a conversation about mutual interests." Sarah leaned back, studying the bikers. Their posture, the way they carried themselves, they definitely had a military background. Unlike the Steel Serpents, they looked her in the eye with respect, not challenge. "I'm listening," Stone said, glancing at Deputy Martinez once more. "Deputy Martinez is here," Sarah replied firmly, her voice warm and reassuring. "She's part of this, and she's here to stay. I think we can all agree on that, don't you?" Stone leaned forward, his eyes twinkling. "Cross is coming to oversee a major shipment. Something big enough that Jake's got his people running scared. We've got intel, manpower, and motivation. What we need is someone who knows how to run an OP like this. Someone with Navy training. You hear a lot about small community military folks. Word gets around, doesn't it?" Stone's voice softened slightly. "I knew Johnson. He was a good." "Oh my." The mention of her fallen teammate hung in the air after a moment. Sarah spoke, her voice soft and gentle. "If we do this, we do it my way. Clean, precise, by the book, no cowboy stuff. I wouldn't have it any other way." Commander, as the Iron Wolves left Martinez, let out a breath she'd been holding. She'd been holding it for a long time. "You sure about this, Sarah? You sure you want to do this? You know, you could just let it go. But sometimes you have to. Sometimes you have to work with the devil you know to take down the one you don't." The pieces were moving now. Cross was coming, bringing with him whatever operation had Jake so nervous. The good news was that the Iron Wolves were on board and Martinez represented a potential link to legitimate law enforcement. The only thing left for Sarah to do was come up with a plan that wouldn't get everyone killed. Night had fallen over the small coastal town, and when Sarah's phone buzzed with an encrypted message from Mike, she opened the file to find detailed satellite imagery of 3 locations. Sarah noticed that the port warehouses were registered to shell companies, but clearly serving as Steel Serpent storage facilities. She was just about to finish her analysis when she heard a knock at her door. Betty stood there looking nervous but determined. "You've got visitors," she whispered in the back alley. They say they're friends of yours. Sarah grabbed her Glock and followed Betty down the back stairs in the shadowy alley. She found Stone and his sergeant-at-arms along with an unexpected figure. Sheriff Cooper. "We've got a problem," he said without preamble. "Cross isn't. I'm just here for a routine inspection. I see he's moving his entire operation here permanently." "Why?" Sarah asked, though she was already piecing it together. "Port Haven's perfect remote-controlled local government, easy access to shipping lanes," Stone replied. "But that's not the real reason." I handed Sarah a folder. "Our contacts spotted these guys arriving at the private airstrip outside town. The surveillance photos showed familiar faces. Members of the same smuggling network Sarah had encountered in Singapore. The operation that had gone wrong. They're consolidating." Sarah muttered, using the steel serpents as cover for a major distribution hub. "It gets worse." Cooper added, "Mayor Hayes called an emergency council meeting tonight. They're voting to slash the police budget by 60%. I'll have to lay off half my deputies, including Martinez, and clear the board," Sarah concluded, making sure there's no official resistance. Stone nodded grimly. "Cross arrives in 3 days. Jake's boys are already setting up additional security. Whatever they're planning, it's big." Sarah studied. "The photos are really worrying. They'll be expecting trouble from law enforcement, maybe even rival gangs. But they won't be looking for a naval intelligence operation." "Not exactly," Cooper corrected. Stone smiled. "Half my crew are former Special Forces Rangers, Marine Recon, even a couple of Delta boys. We've kept it quiet and maintained our cover as just another MC, but we've got the training." Sarah raised an eyebrow. "A motorcycle club full of Spec Ops veterans. Someone's got to watch out for the little guy." Stone replied, "We've been tracking Cross for months, gathering intel, but we needed someone with your specific experience to put it all together." The back door opened and Martinez stepped out, still in her deputy uniform. "We've got movement. 3 steel serpent trucks just left their compound, headed for the warehouse. They're moving things around." Sarah said, "I know you're trying to protect your people, Sheriff, but we're going to." Cooper sighed. "I could really use some official cover for this." I know, Sarah replied. "What did you have in mind?" "I need Martinez and any deputies you trust completely to do some selective enforcement traffic stops, license checks, anything to slow down their movements and gather intel. They'll complain to Hayes, but I've warned them. They'll just have to put up with it." Cooper gave a little laugh. I know. I just want to make sure we're doing everything we can to help." The bikes that passed their checkpoints earlier got them all excited about potential rivals moving in. They'll be expecting gang warfare, so they won't be looking for a surgical strike. Sarah pulled out her phone and showed them Mike's satellite imagery. "We've got 3 days to map their security, identify vulnerabilities, and set up for the main event." "What exactly is the main event?" Martinez asked. "We're going to let Cross set up his operation exactly as planned. Let him bring in his international contacts." Sarah smiled coldly. "We're going to take it all down at once, but we'll need one more piece of the puzzle." Cooper said, "What's that evidence?" Cooper replied, "Enough to bypass Hayes and go straight to the feds. The kind of evidence that makes even corrupt politicians run for cover." Betty, who had been quietly listening, spoke up. "I might be able to help with that. The diner's been here for 40 years. Even people who think they're too important to be seen in a place like this, and everybody talks." Sarah looked at the older woman with newfound respect. "You've been keeping track of names, dates, and conversations. I may be just a diner owner, but I'm not stupid. I knew someday someone would need to know what really goes on in this town." Betty pulled a worn leather notebook from her apron pocket. 9 years of notes. Everything from Hayes's first meeting with the Steel Serpents to which council members started spending more than they had, and things got pretty tight. Stone let out a little whistle. "Ma'am, you might just be the most dangerous person here." He gave a little wink. "Meet back here tomorrow night." Sarah gave him a little smile. "Bring your best people. The sheriff will need everything Betty's collected, plus whatever your deputies can legally gather. We've got one shot at this." The group dispersed, and Betty gave Sarah's arm a little squeeze. "You're not just doing this for the town, are you?" She gave Sarah a little wink. "This is personal." Sarah thought of her fallen teammates and the mission that had gone wrong. Sometimes things just don't go to plan. Personal motivation just means you'll work harder to get it right. Back in her apartment, Sarah spread out the intel, starting to form a plan. Cross had no idea he was walking into a trap. 3 years in the making, he thought he was expanding his empire, but he was really stepping into a sniper's crosshairs. Her phone buzzed with a text from Mike. "Satellite shows more movement. Whatever they're planning, it's massive. Watch your back. Sarah sent back a simple reply. Don't worry, we're ready for them. Don't worry, this time we're ready for them. The next morning brought tense activity across town. Martinez and the remaining trusted deputies conducted strategic traffic stops on Steel Serpent vehicles, while Iron Wolves members made their presence known through carefully orchestrated drive-bys of gang territory. Sarah sat at her usual spot in Murphy's diner watching Jake and two of his lieutenants arguing intensely across the street. Their frustration was visible even from a distance. Your coffee is getting cold, Betty said, sliding into the booth. Across from her, she placed her worn notebook on the table. Here's everything I've got on Hayes and his cronies. It's 10 years of notes, conversations, and meetings that weren't supposed to happen. Sarah flipped through the pages, her expression hardening. Betty, this is more than just weapons smuggling. They've been laundering money through half the businesses in town. Why do you think I started keeping track? My dear God, rest his soul, always said knowledge was power when he passed. They started pressuring me to sell the diner. I knew I needed insurance. There was a bit of a commotion outside. They were all looking at Jake, who was shoving one of his own men against a wall. He was clearly really angry. The pressure was getting to them. Sarah's phone buzzed with a message from Stone. Package secured. Meet at the old cannery. I need to go, Sarah told Betty. Stay alert. Things are going to get tense before they get better. The abandoned canner sat on the outskirts of town. Its rusted equipment was serving as a silent witness. Sentinels. Sarah found Stone and his core team waiting inside, along with an unexpected guest, a bound and gagged Steel Serpent. Prospect found him snooping around our territory. Stone explained that he figured he might have something interesting to share. Sarah approached the terrified Prospect. She recognized him as one of the newer recruits, barely old enough to drink. What's your name, kid? She asked kindly. T.T. Tommy, he stammered. Once Stone removed the gag, he said, All right, Tommy. Let's talk about the shipment coming in with Cross. Tommy's eyes widened. I don't know anything about that, Sarah. You're wearing a Prospect cut, which means you do the grunt work, loading, unloading, keeping watch. You know things. The question is, are you willing to share those things, or do we have to get creative? The young man swallowed hard. They'll kill me, he said. Kid, Stone growled. What do you think they'll do when they find out you got caught on our turf? Tommy broke. He poured out the shipping schedules, guard rotations, and the layout of the compound. Sarah's heart was racing as she listened to the last piece of information he shared. It was a list of names and locations. Cross was bringing it personally. Jake said it was worth more than all the weapons combined. Sarah and Stone exchanged glances. They both knew a list like that could expose entire trafficking networks or reveal every corrupt official on Cross's payroll. Tommy added, his voice shaking. He said they know someone's working against them. Jake called in extra muscle. He said they'd get professional guys, not just bikers. Martinez's phone buzzed again. Oh no, Martinez, it's a problem. Hayes just suspended Cooper. They've named Jake's brother as interim sheriff, and they've put him somewhere safe. Sarah told Stone, nodding toward Tommy. She said he might be useful later. Back at the diner, Sarah found Martinez waiting with Cooper and Betty. The former sheriff looked defeated. They're moving faster than we expected. Cooper said Hayes called it a routine administrative review, but we all know what this means. They're consolidating power before Cross arrives. Martinez added, My badge probably won't be worth much. By morning, Sarah and Cooper had considered their options. With Cooper out and legitimate law enforcement compromised, they'd lost their official cover. Sarah's phone buzzed again. Mixed satellite showed major movement, with multiple vehicles converging on their location. Professional operators, not gang members, were approaching. Sarah and Cooper watched carefully as 3 black SUVs with tinted windows rolled slowly past the diner. They were not even trying to be subtle anymore. Martinez muttered that they didn't need to be. Sarah replied that they thought they'd got control of the town. That made things more challenging. Them being so confident makes them a bit sloppy, bless them. Betty watched the SUVs disappear around the corner. What do we do now? Sarah said firmly. We changed the plan. They're expecting resistance from law enforcement or rival gangs. So we'll give them exactly what they're watching for while we hit them from a direction they'll never see coming. The Iron Wolves, Cooper asked. Part of it, but we've got another card to play. Sarah pulled out her phone and dialed Mike. Remember that favor you owe me? I need to. Satellite coverage, real time. I need you to make some calls. It's time to wake up some old ghosts as night fell over the town. More black SUVs arrived. Professional mercenaries mixed with Steel Serpents. Members setting up checkpoints and patrol routes. They were preparing for war, but they were preparing for the wrong kind of fight. In the basement of Murphy's Diner, Sarah laid out the revised plan to her core team. The Iron Wolves would play their part, making noise and drawing attention. Martinez and Cooper would work their remaining law enforcement contacts. Betty's evidence would be their insurance policy, but the operation that would come from the shadows, executed by people who specialized in the impossible, would be tomorrow's adventure. Tomorrow, Sarah told them, Cross arrives with his precious list and his international contacts. He's expecting to find a town under his complete control, but he's going to find out what happens when you underestimate the wrong people. Outside, thunder rolled across the bay. A storm was coming to Port Haven by the time it was. Over nothing would be the same. Sarah's phone lit up with a series of encrypted messages. The first was from Mike. He said, Ghost team activated. 6 operators. All former teammates. They're yours if you want them. The second was from an unknown number. Commander Ghost said, The lead here team is in position. They're awaiting your orders. The third was from Stone. He said, My people report that Cross's advanced team is doing recon. They're thorough. They're professional. These aren't regular muscle. Sarah gathered her team closer. She said, Listen carefully to what I'm about to tell you. In about 6 hours, Cross and his people are going to try to take over this town. They have the numbers, the weapons, and the tactical advantage. What they don't have is the understanding of who they're really fighting. She spread out a detailed map of Port Haven. They're watching the streets, the obvious approaches, the law enforcement, the Iron Wolves, and anyone they think might resist. But they're not. We're watching the shadows, and that's where we're going to hurt them, Martinez said quietly. The Ghost team, Sarah replied. Martinez, you know I'm with you, right? She asked, turning to look at him. Of course, he replied, smiling. I've got 6 operators ready to go, she continued. They're all former special operations people who owe me favors and know how to move without being seen. They've been in position since yesterday, mapping patrol routes and identifying vulnerabilities, she added. I've been studying the map, Cooper replied. Even with them, we're still outnumbered. Number doesn't win fights. I know, Sarah replied. Position, timing, and initiative do. Betty spread out her notebook. I've marked every business they're using to launder money, every warehouse where they store contraband. If we hit them all at once, it'll be chaos. Stone finished. They won't know where to focus their response. Sarah's phone buzzed again. Mike, the final satellite pass shows Cross's convoy is mobilizing multiple vehicles and heavy security. ETA Z600. Perfect. Sarah said that gives us 5 hours to get everything in place. Stone, get your people ready. Martinez. Cooper, you need to get in touch with the Ghost team's recon. Betty, I know the older woman smiled. Stay out of sight and let the professionals work. Actually, Sarah said, I need you to open the diner at the usual time. Just act normal. Cross's people will be watching, so make sure you don't do anything different, or they'll know something's wrong. Betty straightened her apron. Honey, I've been serving coffee to criminals for years while gathering evidence against them. I think I can handle one more morning. Thunder crashed outside as Sarah. She checked her weapons one final time, remembering that she'd told her team, We're not just defending, we're hunting. These people had come to their home thinking they'd be easy prey. Well, let's show them what happens when predators become prey. The rain was getting heavier as enemy operators moved through the dark streets. Their night vision equipment gave them confidence, but Sarah knew it would also be their weakness. They were looking through a digital green haze, while her people knew every shadow by heart. Ghost lead status, Sarah whispered. Into her radio, first team moving into the kill zone. 20 operators moving in 4-man cells, heavy weapons demo gear, Stone, Iron Wolves in position, ready to create chaos. Mark, Sarah watched through her scope as the enemy's lead element approached Murphy's Diner. They moved well, covering angles, checking corners. Professional, dangerous, but predictable. She smiled, execute phase 2. She ordered across town, the Iron Wolves roared to life, their motorcycles thundering through the streets in what appeared to be a panicked evacuation. The enemy operators reacted exactly as trained, splitting their forces to investigate the new threat. Their divided Ghost 2 reported a second convoy moving to intercept the bikers. Martinez, now from her position at the old sheriff's office, triggered the prepared devices. Strategic transformers blew, plunging new sections of town into darkness while illuminating others. The enemy's night vision equipment suddenly became a liability as they dealt with rapidly changing light conditions. Multiple targets were disoriented. Ghost 3 confirmed, moving to engage. The first shots were the silent, Suppressed weapons were taking out key targets in the enemy's command structure. By the time they realized they were under attack, the Ghost team had already melted away to new positions. Commander Mike's voice came through her earpiece. "Third convoy is holding back," he said. "Their commander is smart. He's realized something's wrong." "That's what the package is for," replied Sarah. "Good thinking." She transmitted a burst of encrypted data, the fake list from a location near the center of town, as predicted. The enemy electronic warfare team picked it up. They picked up the transmission and saw that they were moving. The Ghost lead reported that all units were converging on the transmission source. Sarah smiled grimly. Phase 3, all units execute at will. The storm above provided perfect cover as the real battle began. The Iron Wolves abandoned their decoy run and launched coordinated attacks on the enemy's vehicles. The Ghost team operators picked off anyone who tried to call for backup or establish a command position. But it was the townspeople who proved most effective. Every door that looked like an escape route led to a well-prepared ambush, with defenders hidden in the shadows, ready to shoot at the enemy. The operators found themselves fighting phantoms, unable to establish control or consolidate their forces. Commander Stone's voice was tight with controlled excitement. "They're falling back to preset rally points." "No," Sarah ordered. "They're falling back to where we want them." The fake list data had led them straight into the town's old warehouse district, a maze of buildings rigged with motion sensors and prepared firing positions. The enemy operators were forced to seek cover, and they found themselves being herded into increasingly smaller spaces. They were in Ghost team status, and 15 targets had already been eliminated. There were 20+ wounded, but they were contained in the warehouse sector. Sarah switched channels to Mike. "Mike, what's the third convoy doing?" "It's finally moving in. I think their commander must have realized that his advanced teams are being decimated." "Perfect, Martinez, initiate the final sequence." The remaining street lights are switching off completely, plunging the town into total darkness. The storm above is getting worse. The rain is hammering down as lightning splits the sky through her thermal scope. Sarah kept a close eye on the remaining enemy forces, who were clustering together in the warehouses. Their training had told them to consolidate in order to establish a defensive position, but they were doing exactly what she'd planned. "All units, be advised, Phase 4 is active." "I'll say it again. Phase 4 is weapons-free." The remaining enemy operators never saw it coming. The Ghost team snipers took out their leadership, the Iron Wolves cut off their escape routes, and the townspeople, led by Cooper and Martinez, maintained a constant barrage that kept them pinned down. The enemy were pinned down, but it was Sarah who delivered the final blow. She moved through the rain like a shadow as she approached the main warehouse where the enemy commander had established his last position. He was the man who'd led the third convoy and held back, thinking he was smarter than the rest. Well, it was time to show him just how wrong he was. "All units, hold position," she ordered. This one's personal lightning flashed again as Sarah moved towards the warehouse entrance. The real fight was about to begin. Lightning illuminated the Sarah moved silently through the shadows of the warehouse interior, her thermal scope revealing 6 heat signatures on the upper level. The enemy commander and his remaining elite team, Ghost, were maintaining overwatch. She whispered, "No one leaves this building." "Copy that, Commander. We've got you covered." The warehouse floor was a maze of old machinery and storage crates. Perfect cover, but also perfect for an ambush. Sarah could hear the enemy team communicating in whispers. Their voices carried a familiar cadence, like former Special Operations Navy SEALs. "I've gone mercenary," Commander Mike's voice came through her earpiece. "I've got an ID on their leader, Marcus Reaper. I'm so sorry to tell you that he's in Singapore." Sarah's blood ran cold. Cross was there the day her teammates died. He was working for a different contractor. He disappeared before anyone could question his role in the operation's failure. So Cross's voice echoed through the warehouse. "The famous Commander Mitchell. It's been a long time since Singapore." "Not long enough. Reaper, you know why we're here. Give us the list. And maybe some of these townsfolk will be lucky enough to survive the night." Sarah moved between shadows, changing positions, still staying hidden, still hiding behind civilian casualties. Cross, just like Singapore, a burst of gunfire replied, rounds impacting where she'd been seconds before. These weren't random shots. Cross's team was trying to get her into a kill zone. Singapore was business. Cross called out, "Just like this is, you really think your little town can stand against what's coming?" Steel Serpents was just the beginning. Ghost team status on the other forces have been contained and neutralized. The Iron Wolves are now doing a cleanup, but there are still some targets remaining in your building. I heard that, Reaper Sarah replied. Your backup isn't coming. I know you're frustrated, but try to stay calm. They were getting frustrated and making mistakes. 2 operators moved to flank her position, but Sarah was already gone. I don't think you understand what's going on. Cross's voice was closer now. The Steel Serpent organization wasn't the head of the snake. We are that. The list contains everything. It's got every operation, every contract, every killer, and so on. That data, we control it all wrong, Sarah replied, her voice echoing. You don't control anything, not anymore. She triggered the devices Martinez had planted earlier. Flashbangs detonated on the upper level, followed by smoke grenades. The enemy's night vision equipment became worse than useless as the warehouse filled with disorienting light and smoke. Ghost Team external threats negative, she said. Building is secure. No reinforcements approaching. Sarah moved upward, using the chaos to her advantage. The first operator never saw her coming. She was quick. Strike to the throat, another to the temple. Silent and efficient. The second tried to radio for help but received only static. The town's radio jammers were still active, cutting off all communication. It's over, Reaper. Sarah called out. Your men are dead or captured. Your operation is blown. Surrender now like your team surrendered in Singapore. The taunt was meant to enrage her, make her sloppy. Instead, it brought perfect clarity through the smoke and strobing lights. Sarah moved like a ghost. The third and fourth operators fell too. Precise shots. The fifth managed to get off a burst of fire before Sarah's knife found his throat. Then it was just her and Cross. You know what your problem is, Mitchell. His voice was behind her now. You still think like a sailor, honor, duty, protecting the innocent. The world doesn't work that way anymore. You're wrong. Sarah turned, facing him. That's exactly how it works. You just forgot. They moved simultaneously. Cross was good. One of the best. His strikes were precise, powerful. But Sarah had something. He didn't have a reason to win that went beyond money or power. The fight was brutal and close, with bones cracking and blood flowing. Cross landed a crushing blow to her ribs, but Sarah was able to absorb it and counter with a strike that shattered his knee. She was still in Ghost Team status, but she was managing to breathe between breaths. Commander, please end this. As Cross stumbled, Sarah saw her opening and used the same move she'd used countless times in training. They'd taught every sailor this move. It's for Singapore. She said it, and then she struck Cross's eyes widened as he fell. His last words were barely a whisper. You don't know what you've done. Sarah stood over him, breathing hard. Actually, I do. Mike was uploading now. Sarah spoke into her radio, standing over Cross's unconscious form. The real list has been downloaded from their servers while they were chasing our decoy. Every name, every operation, is currently being transmitted to every major intelligence agency worldwide. The storm outside was finally passing. Dawn was breaking over Port Haven through Sarah's thermal scope. She could see the rest of Cross's team being rounded up by the Ghost operators and Iron Wolves. The Steel Serpents who hadn't fled were surrendering, realizing their protection had evaporated. Commander Ghost Lead's voice crackled through her radio. We've secured the port facilities and found something interesting. Shipping manifests, bank records, political payoffs, and more. It goes way beyond weapons smuggling. Sarah moved to cure Cross, zip-tying his hands. How deep state level? She asked. At least, maybe higher. Cross wasn't lying about one thing. This was bigger than the Steel Serpents. Martinez's voice joined the conversation. Sarah, we've got some news. It looks like there's been a bit of a commotion at City Hall. Hayes and half the council are trying to leave town. Cooper's team is keeping them contained. I'm sure the FBI will want to talk to them. Phone with multiple encrypted channels and a small notebook filled with codes. More evidence for the federal authorities to unravel. Betty's voice came unexpectedly over the radio. They'd given her a spare unit to stay in contact. Honey, you might want to get back to the diner. We've got company. Hostile. Unless the FBI's gotten a lot more aggressive since I last checked, I'd say friendly. About a dozen agents in suits looking very official. Their boss says she knows you, Rodriguez. Sarah smiled. Special agent. Rodriguez, her contact during the Singapore operation, told her. I'll be there in 10. Betty put some coffee on and said, It's going to be a long morning. The scene at Murphy's Diner was almost surreal. FBI agents mingled with Iron Wolves, members, deputies, and Ghost Team operators who'd already changed into civilian clothes. Betty moved through it all with pots of coffee and plates of her famous apple pie. Commander Mitchell Rodriguez greeted her with a professional nod. Or should I say the retired commander who somehow managed to expose a multinational criminal enterprise from a small-town diner just happened to be in the right place at the right time. Rodriguez smiled, and I suppose the highly trained operators who helped take down Cross's organization just happened to be passing through, or the fact that the Iron Wolves MC is actually a cover for former Special Forces operator Stone, who just walked in, laughed, and said, "Ma'am, sometimes the best way to hide is in plain sight. Nobody looks twice." At another motorcycle club, we've been tracking Cross for years. Rodriguez continued spreading files across the counter, which was great because it meant we could never get close enough. Then you show up, start trouble with a local gang, and within a week his entire operation falls apart. I'm sure you'll agree that's pretty impressive. Sarah accepted a cup of coffee from Betty, which was a great move. Sometimes bullies need to learn they picked the wrong target. The list you transmitted is already causing waves. Criminal networks worldwide are scrambling, and I'm pleased to say that some corrupted officials are resigning. We've got enough evidence to take down Cross, and we're going to do it. Organizations we didn't even know existed. Cooper joined them looking tired but satisfied. Hayes and the council are singing like canaries. It turns out they've been on Cross's payroll for years, helping him set up shell companies and looking the other way while he built his operation. The Steel Serpents. Sarah asked most of the rank and file are in custody. Martinez reported that Jake and his inner circle tried to run, but the Iron Wolves intercepted them at the county line. They're feeling chatty too, especially after. We showed them the evidence Betty collected. Betty smiled, her smile innocent and kind. It's amazing what people will say when they think the old diner owner isn't paying attention. Rodriguez shook her head in admiration. A Navy commander, a motorcycle club full of Spec Ops veterans, a sheriff's deputy, and a diner owner with a secret notebook sounds like the beginning of a bad joke. Sometimes the best operations come from unlikely alliances. Sarah replied, her voice warm and friendly. Speaking of operations, Rodriguez lowered her voice. That ghost team of yours? Any chance they're interested? We've also got other criminal enterprises that could use their attention. You'd have to ask them. Sarah smiled. The townsfolk were out and about again, walking the streets without fear and holding their heads high. What happens now? Betty asked, refilling coffee cups. Cooper said we rebuild proper law enforcement, legitimate business development, and do things right. He added that he'd already got calls from neighboring towns. Stone said it seems like words are spreading about what happened here, and other communities are dealing with similar problems and looking for help. Sarah raised an eyebrow, looking for help or looking for hope. Both are probably what people need, Martinez answered. People need to know they can stand up to bullies, that they don't have to live in fear, and that they can. We need more than just hope, Rodriguez said, looking around the diner at the amazing team that had come together by chance but had proven more effective than any official task force. We need each other. It was just beginning, but this time she wasn't facing it alone. She had a team, a purpose, and a home worth protecting. Betty, she called out, better stock up on coffee. Something tells me your diner's going to stay busy. Winked Betty, honey, my coffee pot's always ready, and my notebook's got plenty of blank pages left after all. Somebody's got to keep track of what really happens in these small towns. Outside the storm had passed completely, leaving behind a sky as clear as could be. As Sarah's conscience Cross and his operation were finished, the town of Port Haven had found its strength. It was a new beginning. 3 months after the takedown of Cross's operation, Murphy's Diner was busier than ever. The basement, once a simple storage space, had been renovated into what Betty jokingly called the Situation Room. A secure meeting place for Sarah and her expanding network of allies. Sarah sat at her usual booth, reviewing reports from Stone's teams about some suspicious activity along the coast. Mar Martinez, who's now the new sheriff after Cooper retired, came over with a fresh cup of coffee. She had something interesting to share. Remember those warehouse raids last week? They found documents linking 3 state officials to Cross's old network. They're in a bit of a tizzy since the list went public. Sarah's attention shifted to the TV mounted in the corner, showing footage of another high-profile arrest. A weapons dealer with connections to Cross was taken down in another state. A neighboring state by unknown operators, she smiled, recognizing Ghost Team's handiwork. Your friends have been busy, Martinez commented. What friends? I just see effective law enforcement at work. The diner's door chimed as Cooper entered with Stone and Rodriguez, all looking serious. Sarah asked. Rodriguez placed a laptop on the table, showing surveillance photos. Remember how we thought Cross's operation was just about weapons? Turns out that was just the surface. We found evidence of human trafficking routes using the same corridors as the weapons shipment, multiple small towns involved. Cooper added that local officials had been bought off. Did that sound familiar to you, Sarah? She studied the photos and saw the pattern clearly. The same methods Cross had used were now being employed by others trying to fill the power vacuum. How many towns? She asked. At least 6 that we know of, Stone replied. All small, isolated and vulnerable, just like Port Haven was. Betty appeared with more coffee and her infamous apple pie. Sounds like someone should do something about that already, she said. Rodriguez said the federal task force was being assembled. It was very unofficial and very deniable. I'm sure they're looking for someone to coordinate ground operations. Sarah raised an eyebrow. Let me guess, you recommended someone, actually? Stone interjected. We all did. The Iron Wolves need direction for their more specialized operations. The Ghost team operates better with familiar command, and having a sheriff's special advisor provides useful cover. Plus, Betty added, you need something to do between teaching those self-defense classes. The classes were Sarah's idea. They help the townspeople protect themselves, build confidence and community. The waiting list was now 3 months long. What about here? Sarah asked. This town still needs protecting, Martinez replied with a smile. We've learned a few things besides. You won't be far away, just expanding the definition of home territory. Sarah's phone buzzed with a message from Mike. Got movement on those trafficking cases. Time sensitive. Team standing by for your call. She looked around at her unlikely family. Betty's quiet strength, Martinez's determined leadership, Cooper's steady wisdom, Stone's tactical expertise, Rodriguez's official backing. All part of the same. It's so inspiring to see how this network has grown. It's now dedicated to protecting those who couldn't protect themselves. You know, Sarah, the real problem with Cross and operations like his is that they prey on towns like Port Haven because they think small communities are weak. They mistake kindness for weakness and quiet for cowardice. They forget that small towns are built on community. Betty added, and we're so lucky to have each other. We look out for each other, and that's what makes Port Haven so strong. Martinez finished. Sarah's phone buzzed again. This time it was a message from Ghost. The lead team had assembled, multiple targets had been identified, and they were waiting for further instructions outside. A group of Iron Wolves rode past on patrol. They were a comforting presence to the townspeople, no longer a source of fear. Through the windows of the diner, Sarah could see Port Haven thriving. Businesses were reopening, families were walking without fear, and the community was returning stronger than ever. You know what I learned in the Navy, Sarah said, looking at her team. The most effective operations aren't always about having the biggest force or the most advanced equipment. Sometimes it's about having the right people in the right place, working together for the right reasons. And now other towns need that same lesson. Rodriguez added. Sarah nodded, smiling. I think we can help them learn that too, she said. We were wrong about Port Haven, and we're going to make sure they're wrong about these other towns too. It'll be a bit complicated, Stone warned. We'll need more resources, more coordination. But we've got a diner with a secure basement, he smiled, gesturing to the cozy spot where everyone could relax with coffee. And we've got people who know how to move in the shadows, Martinez added, nodding to where a Ghost team member sat quietly in the corner, blending in perfectly with the morning crowd. Sarah's phone lit up with multiple messages. Mike's satellite coverage confirmed for next operation. Ghost lead teams in position at 3 locations. Stone's Iron Wolves ready to move. Rodriguez federal backup, standing by off the books. Well, Sarah said, opening her laptop. Let's show them what we know about these towns. We can help them just like we helped Port Haven. Betty placed a fresh slice of pie in front of her. Just remember, honey, no matter how far you roam, you've always got a home base here. My coffee pot's always on, and my notebook's got plenty of blank pages. She added with a wink. Sarah smiled. The fight isn't over. It's evolving and growing, but now, she had something she'd never had before. A true team, a clear purpose and a home worth fighting for. Cross had thought he was building an empire, but he'd actually helped create something far more powerful. A network of people dedicated to protecting the vulnerable and standing up to bullies wherever they appeared. All right, team, Sarah said, addressing her team. Let's get to work. We've got some towns to save. The sun was setting over port when Mike's emergency alert came through. Major operation forming in Cedar Grove, he said. Matched Cross's playbook. Multiple hostile forces converging. Local law enforcement compromised. Sarah studied the satellite imagery Mike had sent. Cedar Grove was 3 hours north. Another small coastal town similar to Port Haven. Population 5,000. Isolated. Vulnerable. Perfect target for criminal enterprises looking to establish new territory. It all started with the usual protection rackets. Now we're seeing the same signs we saw here. Corrupt officials, suspicious port activity, unexplained wealth, and they're following Cross's the exact same template. Stone observed that they used the gang as cover while they set up the real operation. Martinez pointed to surveillance photos and said, "These aren't regular gang members. See their movement patterns? They're using professional military training. They're like the Night Raiders, and Cross used the Steel Serpent. The local resistance is strong but isolated. The mayor is in the Raiders' pocket, and the towns are divided and scared." Just like we were, Betty, who'd been quietly taking notes, spoke up and got a call from a diner owner, Mary Prescott. "She's been gathering evidence just like I did. She says things are coming to a head, and they're moving something big through the port tomorrow night." Sarah's phone buzzed again. Ghost lead the advance team in position and confirmed that there's a heavy enemy presence. There are at least 40 operators, and they're well equipped. They're expecting resistance, but we'll give them more than they expect. Stone iron. Wolves can be ready in 2 hours 15. Riders, all combat veterans. Martinez, I can spare 6 deputies, all trained in the new protocols. Rodriguez, unofficial federal backing as always, and I've got 3 teams of agents who'd love to accidentally be in the right place at the right time. Sarah nodded, formulating the plan. They're expecting conventional resistance, local law enforcement, maybe rival gangs. We'll give them what they're expecting, let them think they've got everything under control. Meanwhile, Ghost team. Cooper finished exactly what Betty had asked him to do. He told her to be ready but to stay safe. Her evidence would be crucial later on. He told her, "I've already done that, honey. She's smarter than they think. She's just like someone else I know." Sarah spread out a map of Cedar Grove. "They've got numbers and equipment, but we've got something better. Experience. We know their playbook because we've seen it before. But more importantly, we know how to beat it." Her phone lit up with messages from the team. Mike's satellite coverage confirmed it all. "Hello, team. I just wanted to give you all a quick update on the latest intel. It looks like we've got some new target packages on the radar. They've been identified and are currently awaiting the go order. ETA is about 3 hours. Martin's and Depew's mobile units are on the move. Remember, Sarah, how she spoke to us about these folks thinking small towns are easy targets. They think they can just walk in, by a few officials, intimidate the locals, and take control. Well, they're about to learn the hard way that it's not so easy." Speaking of lessons, Betty added that the Night Raiders have been pressuring local businesses. "Let's keep our eyes and ears open and be ready to respond if needed. Stay safe, and I'll see you all soon." It's so sad when businesses push people around. It sounds like they need a reminder about picking the wrong targets. Sarah smiled, then let's give them one they won't forget. The next few hours were a blur of activity. The Iron Wolves departed in small groups, taking different routes to avoid attention. Martinez's deputies moved out, disguised as civilian traffic. The Ghost team reported their final positions around Cedar Grove. Even Betty's network of diner owners along the coast was activated, providing safe houses and gathering intelligence. Sarah geared up for the operation. She looked around the basement at her core team. What had started as a simple act of standing up to bullies had evolved into something much more. A specialized unit dedicated to protecting small towns from those who would prey on them. She reminded them of Port Haven. She told them to remember how it felt to be afraid, to think you were alone against something too big to fight. Cedar Grove feels that way right now. But tonight we show them they're not alone. We show them that small towns can fight back. Her phone buzzed with one final message. Time for multiple vehicles to enter Cedar Grove. Heavy weapons, professional operators. Whatever they're planning, it's happening soon. Good, Sarah replied, because so are we. Rodriguez checked her weapon. You know, when I was assigned to investigate Cross's operation, I never expected to end up part of a secret task force protecting small towns. Life's funny that way, Betty said, handing out fresh coffee and travel mugs. Sometimes you find your true calling in the last place you'd expect. Mount up, Sarah ordered. Ghost team is in position. Iron. Wolves are nearing the target. Martinez's deputies are in place. It's time to show these people why you don't underestimate small towns. As they moved out, Sarah thought about how much had changed since that morning in Murphy's diner. Two bikers thought they could intimidate a quiet woman drinking coffee. They'd started a chain of events that would reshape not just Port Haven but small towns up and down the coast. They were ready to make some new bullies regret their life choices. Martinez asked, checking her tactical gear. Sarah chambered a round in her weapon, ready to go. Let's go teach the night raiders why you should always be careful who you pick a fight with. Engines roared to life as the team prepared to move out. The night was clear, stars shining bright over Port Haven. Somewhere, North Cedar Grove was about to learn that they weren't alone in their fight. The people trying to take over their town were about to learn a harsh lesson about underestimating small towns. The people who were protecting them did a great job. They approached Cedar Grove with military precision. Sarah's team moved in stages, being careful to avoid drawing attention. The Ghost Team operators had already mapped the Night Raiders' patrol routes and security positions. They identified some weaknesses in their defenses. The Ghost lead status was good. Sarah whispered into her radio as they neared the town limits. The enemy forces were concentrated around the port area. It looked like the main group was preparing for a big shipment. The secondary forces were patrolling the town center. They'd surrounded the sheriff's office. Stone had confirmed this. My scouts had seen it too. The report said that heavy weapons were being used by professional operators mixed with gang members. They were expecting trouble, but looking in the wrong direction. Sarah checked the satellite feed on her tablet. The Night Raiders had set up checkpoints at all major roads into town, but they'd left the old logging trails unwatched. That was an amateur mistake. Martinez, your people are in position. Affirmative. The deputies are spread throughout town, all in civilian cover, ready to move on your signal. Rodriguez, the FBI teams are standing by disguised as fishing boats offshore. They'll move in once we... Sarah's phone lit up with a message from Mary Prescott, the local diner owner. She said that a large group had just come in, all armed, trying not to show it. Their leaders were meeting with the mayor in her back room. She'd got the recorder running, just like Betty showed her. Good girl, Betty said, smiling. You're doing great. She was monitoring communications from the mobile command center that they'd set up in a modified RV. Sarah studied the tactical display from the Night Raiders had turned Cedar Grove. So they'd made the same mistake Cross had, thinking they were preparing for a conventional assault. They didn't realize that their biggest threat would come from within. All units, execute Phase 1, Sarah ordered across Cedar Grove. The Iron Wolves launched their signature loud approach from the east, drawing attention. Martinez's deputies were positioned in civilian vehicles, creating a traffic jam at the main checkpoint. The Ghost Team operators triggered false alarms at several warehouses. They're splitting their forces, Ghost Lead reported. Port Haven. Sarah watched through her scope as the enemy commanders tried to coordinate their response. Their radio communications had been intercepted by Mike's equipment, which showed growing confusion. There were also unknown riders approaching from the east. One voice crackled with multiple civilian vehicles blocking route. There was also a possible breach at Warehouse 3, and no wait alarms at all locations. They were losing control of their security perimeter. Stone observed with satisfaction. Sarah keyed her radio. Phase 2, Ghost Team. You have weapons free on designated targets. Stone began. Run, Martinez, and light them up. The real attack began with surgical precision. The Ghost Team operators did a great job of eliminating key enemy commanders with suppressed weapons. The Iron Wolves' distraction turned into a genuine assault on the night. The Raiders' outer defenses were breached. Martinez's deputies emerged from their civilian covers and targeted specific enemies identified by their intel. Mary reports that the leaders are panicking, but Betty relayed that he's trying to call in reinforcements. Unfortunately, our jammers are blocking communications, but it's a good time for Phase 3. Sarah moved forward with her personal team, a mix of Ghost operators. And the Iron Wolves veterans were off to the port facility, where they'd been told the Night Raiders were preparing to receive a major shipment. Commander Ghost's voice was tight with controlled excitement. You need to see this, he said. It's at the Northwest Warehouse main storage area. Sarah changed course and moved silently through the chaos of battle inside the warehouse. She found what the Night Raiders had been hiding. Dozens of shipping containers, each filled with weapons, drugs, and detailed logs of criminal operations. Just like Cross, she muttered. They're not just taking over the town, they're setting up a distribution hub. Sarah Martinez's voice cut in urgently. We've got movement at the diner. The leader is trying to run, but it's not going to happen. In the confusion, Commander Rodriguez was caught by Martinez's deputies. "We've got enough evidence," he called. "FBI teams are moving in." Sarah watched as the carefully constructed operation fell apart. The night raiders' leadership was eliminated, and their plans were in chaos. The professional operators realized they'd been outmaneuvered and tried to flee. But they found every escape route blocked, just like Port Haven. Cooper observed through the radio. "They never saw it coming," he said. "They made the same mistakes." Sarah replied, "They thought they could. They thought they could take over a small town through fear and intimidation, but they never understood that small towns have their own strength." As the sun rose over Cedar Grove, the full scope of their victory became clear. The night raiders were in custody, their criminal enterprise was exposed, the corrupted officials were being arrested, and most importantly, the townspeople were emerging from their homes, realizing they were finally free. Mary was serving free coffee to everyone, and Betty reported with satisfaction that it was a new day for Cedar Grove. Sarah smiled, remembering similar scenes in Port Haven months ago. She was reassured that she wasn't alone anymore. No small town is alone while we're around. Her phone buzzed with a message from Mike. A similar pattern had been detected in 3 other coastal towns. The ghost team was standing by, ready to leap into action. Martinez observed. Sarah checked her weapon, already thinking about the next operation. It's never done, but that's okay. Someone has to stand up for these towns and remind the bullies why they should be careful who they pick. Fights with Betty added exactly to Sarah's agreement, watching the FBI boats approach the harbor, because sometimes the most dangerous person isn't the one with the biggest gang or the most weapons. Sometimes Betty finished with a smile. It's the quiet woman, drinking coffee in a small-town diner just waiting for someone to make the mistake of causing trouble. 6 months after the takedown of Cross's operation, Sarah's network had grown beyond anything she could have imagined. The basement of Murphy's Diner had become Betty's wall of intelligence, had expanded to include maps, photos and evidence collected from multiple operations, and it was now the nerve center for protecting small towns all along the coast. "We've got movement," Martinez announced, entering the basement command center. "Remember those shipping manifests we found in Cedar Grove? They matched them to activities in Millbrook Harbor." To set up shipping operations, Stone, who'd been monitoring communications, added his report. "It seems the gang calls themselves the Harbor Kings. Local law enforcement has already been compromised, and the mayor's son has just bought a new yacht. It's so expensive he shouldn't be able to afford it. They're not even trying to be subtle anymore." Cooper observed that it's like they're following a playbook. They are spreading out new files and have identified a pattern. After we shut down Cross's operation, his associates scattered. Now they're each trying to rebuild his empire piece by piece. Small towns, corrupt officials, legitimate businesses as fronts. It's a lot to take in. Sarah's phone buzzed with an update from Ghost. Lead surveillance confirms heavy weapons shipments moving through Millbrook Harbor. Professional security teams on site. They're building something big. How many times do they have to learn? Betty wondered, pouring fresh coffee. Small towns aren't easy targets anymore. They haven't learned, Sarah replied. They still think Port Haven and Cedar Grove were flukes. I don't understand what they're really up against. Martinez pulled up the satellite imagery, and it looks like the ghost teams have identified 3 main compounds. It seems the Harbor Kings are using old fishing warehouses as cover. The local police chiefs have been ordered to stay away, just like Hayes did here. Cooper noted the difference while Stone added, "We know their moves now, so we can get ahead of them." Sarah's phone lit up with a series of messages. Mike's facial recognition matched 3 former Cross associates in Millbrook. The Ghost lead packages are ready, the teams are in position, and the Iron Wolves are ready for action. The lovely Scout Harbor Patrol didn't get an official response to their incoming call. They think they're being clever, bless them. Sarah said, studying the intel using the same methods that worked for Cross. She's hoping lightning can't strike thrice and wants to prove them wrong. Martinez asked, checking her tactical gear. Not yet, Sarah pulled up more satellite footage. Look at their patrol patterns. They're expecting resistance from local law enforcement or rival gangs. Just like the others, they're preparing for the wrong kind of fight. Betty approached with a fresh pot of coffee and a knowing smile. Coffee and a knowing smile got a call from Millbrook's local diner owner. The poor man said the Harbor Kings have been pressuring businesses and making examples of anyone who resists. It's so sad. It reminds me of some other bullies we dealt with in the past. It's like history repeating itself. Cooper mused. Sarah corrected him, saying, "No, it's not." She added, "It's teaching a lesson, and these people refuse to learn." Rodriguez checked her secure phone. FBI teams are ready off the books as usual. The ghost team is in position. Sarah asked, affirmative. 6 operators are spread through key locations. They've mapped every patrol route. We've identified all the security weaknesses, Iron Wolves. Stone grinned. 20 riders ready to raise hell on your command, Martinez. 10 deputies, all veterans of Cedar Grove. They know the playbook. Sarah stood, addressing her assembled team. These people think they're smart, following Cross's methods. They don't realize that's exactly why they'll fail. We know their moves before they make them. We know their weaknesses before they show them. She activated the main tactical display, showing Millbrook Harbor. The layout they're expecting is the usual one. Local cops, rival gangs, maybe even a federal investigation. But what they're not expecting is us. We're a ghost team that can strike from anywhere. We know how to fight smarter, not just harder. We've got deputies trained in our methods, and most importantly, we've got a network of small towns ready to stand together. Betty added some fresh intel from her diner network. Word is they're moving something big tomorrow night. Some kind of demonstration to show other towns what happens if they resist. Perfect timing. She smiled. Let's show them what happens when they mess with the wrong towns. She checked her own gear as her team prepared for deployment. Remember Port Haven, she told them, and Cedar Grove, and every small town these people thought they could control through fear and corruption. Tonight, she said, we add Millbrook Harbor to that list. Her phone buzzed one final time. Mike, multiple hostile forces were converging on Millbrook. Whatever they were planning, it was big. Good, she replied. So is our response. The team moved out. Sarah thought about that morning in Murphy's diner when 2 bikers thought they could intimidate their way to control. They'd started something they never expected. They'd started something big, a network dedicated to protecting small towns from those who would prey on them. The team was ready to teach some new bullies an old lesson. Martinez asked, checking her weapons. Sarah chambered a round in her rifle. She always lets show the Harbor Kings why smart predators avoid small towns these days. Outside engines roared to life. As the team prepared to move, the night was clear and perfect for their operation. The Harbor Kings thought they were about to demonstrate their power, but they were about to become another example of why you should never underestimate small towns or the quiet warriors who protected them. Betty, Sarah called back as they prepared to leave. Keep the coffee hot. Something tells me we'll need it when we get back. I've got a fresh notebook ready for MI5 too, Betty replied with a smile. I just know it's going to be another good one. The approach to Millbrook Harbor was executed in complete silence under the cover of darkness. Sarah's team moved into position while ghost team operators had already infiltrated key locations throughout the port facility. Through her night vision goggles, Sarah could see the Harbor King security patrols moving with the false confidence of those who thought they were untouchable. Ghost lead status. Sarah whispered into her radio, all targets. It looks like there's a much larger group of people waiting for us than we expected. I've counted over 50 military operators with some pretty impressive equipment. It seems like they've got something big planned. Stone's voice crackled through the comms, confirming my scout's report that heavy weapons were being moved into position around the harbor. It looks like they're preparing for something big. Sarah studied the thermal imagery on her tactical display. The Harbor Kings have transformed 3 warehouses into fortified compounds with professional security teams protecting what appears to be a massive weapons cache. Martinez, your people are in position. Affirmative, deputies are ready on your signal. Rodriguez, the FBI teams are ready and waiting for your signal. We've got the harbor covered. Sarah's phone lit up with a message from Helen, the local diner owner. There's a major meeting happening now, with the Harbor Kings leadership all present. They're planning some kind of demonstration tomorrow. It looks like they're going to make an example of someone. Betty's voice came through the command channel, just like they did in Port Haven. They always start with a show of force. Sarah watched. As more vehicles arrived at the main warehouse, the Harbor Kings were gathering their full strength and preparing to demonstrate their power to the town. It was just like Cross had tried, just like the Night Raiders had attempted in Cedar Grove. All units, execute Phase 1. Sarah ordered across Millbrook Harbor. Carefully orchestrated chaos erupted. The Iron Wolves launched diversionary attacks from multiple directions. Martinez's deputies, disguised as local traffic, created strategic blockades. Ghost team operators triggered the harbor's emergency. The enemy forces were in a bit of a tiz, with their systems causing confusion. The Ghost team were doing a great job of keeping them on their toes, breaking formation just as they'd been trained to do. Sarah was keeping a close eye on things through her thermal scope, and she could see that the enemy commanders were trying to coordinate their forces. Their radio communications had been picked up by Mike's equipment, and it was clear that they were feeling the pressure. There were multiple breaches on the north side, and they were struggling to communicate with their outer teams. It was a tough situation, but the Ghost team were there to help. Sarah keyed her radio to execute Phase 2, and she could hear the excitement in her team's voices as they were given the go-ahead. Designated targets, Stone, begin your assault. Martinez, light them up. The real attack hit the Harbor Kings from every direction. Ghost team operators eliminated key leaders with surgical precision. The Iron Wolves fainted and turned into a devastating assault on their defensive positions. Martinez's deputies emerged from cover, targeting specific enemies based on their intelligence. Helen reports their leadership is trying to flee. Betty relayed they're heading for the emergency boats, which isn't happening. Sarah responded, Ghost 3 and 4 cut off their escape. Stone blocked the Marina Rodriguez, it's time to bring in your teams. The Harbor Kings leaders made it halfway to their escape boats before finding themselves surrounded by Ghost operators. Their professional security teams realized they'd been outmaneuvered and tried to mount a defense, but found themselves caught between the Iron Wolves and FBI assault teams. Commander Ghost Lead's voice was urgent. You need to see what's in the main warehouse. Sarah moved quickly through the chaos of battle, entering the warehouse through a side entrance. Inside, she guessed what? The Harbor Kings had been preparing for this. They had enough weapons and ammunition to arm a small army, along with detailed plans for taking over other coastal towns. Just as we thought. Sarah Martinez called urgently. We've got movement at the town hall. It looks like some officials trying to quietly disappear. Ghost 5 and 6 intercept. No one leaves town until we've confirmed their involvement. The battle for Millbrook Harbor lasted less than an hour, but its impact will be felt for a long time to come. It's so sad. For years the Harbor Kings were captured and their operations exposed. Their professional security teams found themselves outmatched and surrendered to FBI forces as dawn broke over the harbor. Sarah watched as federal agents processed the scene. Local residents who'd lived in fear for months emerged to witness their town's liberation. Just like in Port Haven, Cooper observed people never learn. They learn the wrong lessons. They see towns like this as weak and isolated. They never understand that small communities have their own strengths. Strength. Her phone buzzed with a message from Mike. Similar operations had been identified in 2 more coastal towns. The Ghost team was ready for deployment. It looked like they weren't done yet. Martinez noted. Sarah checked her weapon. She was already thinking about the next operation. We're never done, she said. As long as there are people who think they can prey on small towns, we'll be here to prove them wrong and remind them. Betty added through the radio. Sometimes the most dangerous person isn't the one with the biggest gang, or the... Sarah agreed. Most guns are sometimes. She watched the sun rise over Millbrook Harbor. It's the quiet ones who decide that enough is enough. The ones who stand up and fight back. They're around her, and the town is coming back to life. The Harbor Kings are gone. Their attempt to build a criminal empire was shattered, just like those who'd tried before them. And somewhere out there, other towns are waiting. They need the same help and the same hope that Port Haven found that morning. 2 bikers made the mistake of picking the wrong target. Martinez asked, checking her gear, and smiled, thinking of that morning in Murphy's diner that seemed so long ago. She was always ready because she wanted to remind these bullies why they should be careful who they pick fights with and why. Betty added that they should always think twice before causing trouble in a small town. It had been 1 year since the confrontation that started it all in Murphy's diner, and Sarah stood at her usual window booth, watching the morning fog. The town rolled in from the ocean, and it was clear that things had changed in ways she never expected. Port Haven had become so much more than just a quiet coastal community. It had become a symbol of hope for small towns everywhere. Betty approached with fresh coffee, just like she had that fateful morning. Penny for your thoughts, she said. Just thinking about how it all started. Sarah replied. 2 bikers who thought they could intimidate a diner owner found a Navy commander instead. Betty smiled, though she thought they weren't the last ones to make that mistake. Make that mistake, Sarah's phone buzzed with the morning intelligence briefing from Mike. In the past year, their network had done some pretty amazing things. They'd disrupted criminal operations in 12 coastal towns, dismantled 3 major trafficking rings, and exposed dozens of corrupt officials. The Ghost team had become legendary among criminal circles, an invisible force that struck without warning, protecting small communities from those who would prey on them. They'd also taught law enforcement in other towns how to resist corruption and stand against intimidation. How to resist corruption and stand against intimidation. Remember those files we found in Millbrook Harbor? We finally finished decrypting them. What did you find? Names, dates, locations. It turns out Cross wasn't just building a criminal empire. He was creating a template, a way for others to target and take over small towns systematically. Stone entered the diner, followed by Cooper and Rodriguez. The Iron Wolves leader looked serious. That explains what we're seeing up and down the coast. Different groups, same playbook. They're learning, Rodriguez added, spreading surveillance photos across the table after what happened here in Cedar Grove and Millbrook Harbor. They're getting more careful, operating in smaller groups, staying mobile but still targeting small towns. Cooper observed, still thinking they can control communities through fear and corruption. Sarah studied the photos, the patterns were clear. Criminal organizations are adapting their methods, but still underestimating the strength of small communities. They're not the only ones who... I've learned so much, Sarah said with a smile. Every town we help becomes stronger. Every community that stands up becomes an example for others. Her phone lit up with multiple messages. Ghost lead new activity detected in 3 coastal locations. Iron Wolves scout, suspicious movement in harbor towns north of here. Mike, satellite shows pattern-matching crosses template. Betty, refresh their coffee cups. Looks like some people still need to learn the hard way. They never understand. Martinez said, they see small towns as easy targets. They never expect to find people like us waiting for them. That's their biggest mistake, Sarah replied with a smile. They think they can walk into any small town, throw their weight around and take control. They never realize that these communities have their own strength, their own protectors. Rodriguez checked her secure phone. The FBI's been tracking increased criminal activity along the coast, she said. They're getting organized, sharing resources. Goodstone smiled. That makes them easier to find, she said. The steel serpents are gone, and their attempted takeover is just a story told in Betty's notebook. You know what the real difference is, Sarah asked. It's between us and them. Besides, we're the good guys. Martinez quipped. They see small towns as targets. We see them as home. They think they can control communities through fear. We know that real strength comes from people standing together. Her phone buzzed again. It was Helen from Millbrook Harbor. There are strange bikes in town. There's a new gang trying to move in. Remember how it was? You helped us and it never ends, Cooper said with a smile. Thank you, Sarah replied. As long as there are people who think they can prey on small towns, we'll be here to prove them wrong. Betty appeared with a fresh pot of coffee and her famous apple pie. Well then, guess we better fuel up, she said with a laugh. Sounds like we've got more bullies to teach some manners. You know what I've learned this past year, Sarah said, looking at her team that morning when those bikers walked in. And they thought they were just picking on a lone woman in a diner. They never realized they were starting something much bigger. A network, Martinez added. A mission, Stone continued. A family, Betty finished. Sarah's phone lit up with final confirmation from Ghost lead teams in position at all 3 locations, awaiting your command. She looked around at her unlikely family, the diner owner who'd started it all, the sheriff who'd found her courage, the Iron Wolves leader who'd become a trusted ally, and so many more. FBI agent who'd chosen to fight from the shadows, and all the others who joined their cause. Well then, Sarah said, checking her weapon, let's go and remind some people why you should always be careful who you pick a fight with in small towns. And why, Betty added with a knowing smile, the quiet woman drinking coffee might just be the most dangerous person in the room. Outside, engines roared to life as the team prepared to move out somewhere along the coast. Other small towns were waiting for help, for hope, for someone to show them they weren't alone, and that Sarah's team would be there just as they had been since that morning when 2 bikers made the mistake that changed everything. The evening sun cast long shadows across Port Haven as Sarah sat in her usual booth at Murphy's Diner finishing the day's reports. A year had passed since those first 2 bikers had walked in looking for trouble. Now the Diner Basement Command Center coordinated operations, protecting small towns up and down the coast. While Betty's coffee and pie kept everyone fueled with coffee and pie, Sarah shared the great news with her team last night. The operation in Harbor Bay was a complete success. They had neutralized a criminal network, arrested corrupt officials, and secured the community. That makes 15 towns liberated. Martinez marked the location on their map with a proud smile. Not bad for a year's work, started right here, he said. Betty smiled, refilling coffee cups with two bikers who had picked the wrong target. Sarah's phone buzzed with Mike. The latest intelligence update has revealed that criminal organizations are adapting their tactics. They're avoiding small coastal towns and looking for easier targets inland. Cooper has observed that they're running scared, while Stone has corrected words spreading in the underworld. Small towns aren't easy targets anymore, not with the ghost team out there, and us watching. Rodriguez entered the diner carrying fresh intelligence files. We're seeing a significant decrease in organized criminal activity along the coast, which is great news. The small town effect is working its magic. Criminal organizations are warning each other. Other to avoid communities like Port Haven because they never know. Martinez grinned when the quiet woman was drinking coffee. She might be a Navy commander. Sarah studied the latest reports. The changes were dramatic. Criminal networks that once saw small towns as easy prey now avoided them entirely. The template cross had created the one that had inspired so many others. It was now being used to teach criminals what locations to avoid. You know what the real victory is? Sarah asked, looking around at her team. It's not just about the towns we've helped. It's about the ones we haven't had the chance to help, the communities that never got targeted because the criminals were too afraid. Betty placed her worn notebook on the table. The one that had started it all got a call from a diner owner in Mountain View. They said some bikers were causing trouble trying to pressure local businesses. But the strangest thing happened. What's that? Sarah asked, though she already knew the answer. The bikers got a phone call, and then, before anyone knew what was going on, they were gone. Apparently someone told them to go away. About what happened here, about what happens to people who pick fights in small towns these days. Stone laughed. Reputation's a powerful thing. Sarah's phone lit up with a series of final messages. Ghost lead all sectors clear, no hostile activity detected. Mike's satellite shows criminal operations moving away from coastal regions. Iron Wolves scout roads are quiet. They've learned to stay away, so what now? Martinez asked. With the coast secure, do we stand down? Sarah stood, moving to the window where she'd sat that fateful morning. Outside Port Haven was peaceful, but somewhere else, other communities might need their help. We need to learn the lessons that started here. We adapt, she said finally, just like they have. We stay ready, stay vigilant, because somewhere, someone will eventually forget the lessons we taught here. They'll think they've found an easy target, a quiet town they can control through fear and intimidation. When they do, Cooper asked, they'll learn the same lesson the Steel Serpents learned, the same lesson we've taught every criminal organization. Tried to prey on small towns. Sometimes the most dangerous person isn't the one with the biggest gang or the most guns. Betty added, serving a final round of coffee. It's the quiet ones who decide that enough is enough. They're the ones who stand up and show others how to fight back. Sarah looked at her unlikely family. There was the diner owner who'd become their heart. There was the sheriff who'd found her courage. There were the Iron Wolves who'd become protectors. And there was the ghost team that struck from shadows and all the others who joined their cause. You know what those first two bikers really did? She asked, when they walked in here thinking they could intimidate a small town. What's that? Martinez asked. They didn't just pick a fight with the wrong person, they helped create something they never expected. A network of people dedicated to protecting small towns, standing up against bullies and criminals who think they can prey on quiet communities. Her phone buzzed one final time with a message. From Helen in Millbrook Harbor, thank you so much. Our town is stronger than ever now, and we're helping to protect others just like you who helped us. As the sun set over Port Haven, it cast a golden light across the peaceful streets of diners and small towns up and down the coast. People went about their lives without fear, knowing they weren't alone and that there were people watching, ready to remind anyone who forgot why you should always be careful who you pick a fight with in small towns. Sometimes, Sarah thought, watching as the last race days of sunlight fade, we see that the biggest mistakes lead to the most important changes. Sometimes, the worst decision a bully can make is walking into a small town diner thinking they found an easy target. After all, you never know who might be sitting there quietly drinking their coffee, just waiting for someone to make that mistake. And there are two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you'll definitely want to check out these next two. Just click and enjoy.